My next guest served as chaplain at one of the most infamous prisons in the United States, Death Row at San Quentin State Prison in California. There was a time when he, too, was in danger of going in the wrong direction in his life. Here to share his story of redemption, forgiveness, and hope is pastor, entrepreneur, and author of Death Row Chaplain, Reverend EARL SMITH. He joins us from Sacramento. EARL, thank you for being here. Before we get to your time at San Quentin, I want you to describe what it was like growing up in Stockton, California. You were very close to your father, to whom you dedicated your book. You say he was your best friend, your hero. What lessons did he teach you? And how, despite his presence and example, did you get involved in gangs and drugs at 11 years old?
Well, Raymond, thank you for having me. I think one of the real clear lessons my dad taught me was, he was my baseball coach. We played a game, we were winning, I made an error, and we lost. And so I get in the car, I could only call him coach on the field. I get in the car, and I'm crying. He says, "What's wrong?" I said, "You know what's wrong, I made an error, they hate me." And he says, "What did you do?" I said, "I made an error, and I'm screaming." And he says, "Son, if it's a name for it, you're not the first one that did it." And I was a little leaguer, and he told me that, and I've never forgotten that lesson, that it's beyond you. The picture has to be always bigger than you, and that's really what he was telling me, that we'll get through this as well. And so many times the things that I've done in my life, my dad was there almost whispering in my ear, we'll get through this as well.
And by your late teens, in 1975, you are wrapped up in a gang, drugs, and you had a harrowing experience that changed your life forever. Two guys come to your door. What happened next?
Well, one of the guys owed me money. He was selling drugs for me, and he was late. I put word out I was going to find him. He brought another guy I'd never seen in my life. I was watching the World Series, love baseball, and so when they knock on the door, I just let them come in. I have them sit down until I figure out what I'm going to do. He made a sign to the guy that he brought with him that I didn't know, and the guy pulled a gun out and just started shooting me. And he shot me. Wow. He actually emptied the gun because he stood over me clicking it after it was empty, and the guy says, "Come on, he's done." After they left, unbeknownst to me, the police had me under surveillance, so they actually ran by the police car that it was on the corner having me under surveillance. I knocked on my neighbor's door and said, "I've been shot, you need to call the police." When she calls the police, they respond, they're there like in a hurry, and they come in, two of them leave, and so she says, "Where's the ambulance?" And the officer said to her, "Lady, if you want an ambulance, you call them." So she ended up having to call for an ambulance as well. And when I got to the hospital, my dad was there, and he stands next to me, and he says, "Son, this is bad, but we're going to get through this." And I thought all the things I'd done to embarrass him, but yet here he still was saying, "We're going to get through this." And he told me, he said something that really hit me. He said, "Son, you're a rebel, but you're God's rebel, and he's going to use you to his advantage."
Wow. And as all this is going on, you claim you hear a voice.
Well, I did. I mean, I did hear a voice. My dad looked at the doctor, Dr. James Morrissey, and he says, "How bad is it?" The doctor said he's not going to make it. The doctor had asked me to tell the police who was there who did it, and I laughed at him. And he says, "I don't know what's wrong with you people." He walked off. My dad says, well, he grabbed this doctor and brought him back. He says, "You do what you do best, and I'm going to go do what I do best." And my dad left to pray. I'm there on this gurney by myself, and this voice speaks to me and says, "You're not going to die. I have something for you to do." I clearly started to laugh because I had been around long enough to know that this voice was unusual, because as the voice started to speak to me, all the pain from the bullet stopped, the burning stopped, and the doctor thought I was going into shock. When he came back, I said, "If I tell you where the bullets are, will that help?" And he says, "No," but I started to point at my nose, my neck, my shoulder, where I was shot in my face, my chest, and everywhere I point, The bleeding stopped, the holes closed up. The doctor didn't know what was going on, but it was that voice that says, you're not going to die, I have something for you to do. So people say, well, you say you heard a voice? I'm positive I heard a voice, and the response of that voice was the pain stopped that I was in.
So you continue your education with the goal of obeying God's message to become a minister. That's how you interpreted it, right? And in 1983, at 27, you become the chaplain of San Quentin Prison, the youngest ever chaplain, Protestant chaplain, hired by the California Department of Corrections. The fact that you could have ended up in that prison like the men to whom you were then ministering, how did that realization help you do the job?
Well, I remember when, as a kid, we'd watch these Jimmy Cagney movies, and I'd always see the priest going in to visit his friend that was always seemingly locked up. And for me, everyone always said, okay, you're the guy that's going to get locked up, and such is going to be the priest to visit you. And yet here I was, and these were not just people, they were my friends. Some of my friends were there. Some of my friends were doing time there. And I knew there's a difference in doing something bad and being bad. And you can actually be a decent person, do something bad, and there's a result associated with the bad deed that you perform. And I looked at some of these guys that I knew, I grew up with, and I just thought, wow, somehow or another God has given me a reprieve, and he's allowing me to see what the reprieve really was about.
You know, the theologian, Cardinal Avery Dulles, who was a friend of mine, he used to say that men facing the death penalty were given a grace. It was a finite time to reconcile with God and prepare themselves for eternity, time they may not have made use of if they were out on the street. Does that ring true to your experience, Earl?
Yes, it does. I believe that when someone is condemned or someone is, in some states, if you get a life sentence, that's the same as that's being condemned because you're never going to get released. You're going to die while detained. And when I hear that, I think the reflection time that takes place, you're condemned to die, yet there's a process that you go through after you're condemned, and there's a reflection process. First, you're almost in a sense of denial that this actually happened. You're looking for an angle, and maybe there are some angles. Raymond, I've had people that were on my caseload that were innocent that are at home now. So I may have a different view of what I saw because I know that people were on death row that are at home.
Sure.
In fact, I have a guy at home. I have a transition home in Stockton, and I have a guy right now that was on my caseload on death row that's now living at my transition home.
I want to get back to the shooting and the aftermath, your personal story. You go into San Quentin as a chaplain, and you see the man who shot you, and you tell him what?
Well, when I saw him, it was the third time I'd ever seen him in my life. I saw him when he shot me. I saw him in court. I didn't testify against him. I wanted him on the street because I wanted to kill him. He ended up confessing, and so they gave him time, and they sort of moved him around, hiding him. And now I'm going by giving Christmas cards out, and I see this guy. And I realize, Raymond, that the forgiveness is a great word. Yet, until you encounter the thing that's caused you pain, or come to sync with the fact that there's pain associated with a deed, you don't really know what forgiveness is like. And when I saw him, I realized I didn't forgive him at that immediate moment. And so I kept giving these Christmas cards out to the guys. I'm crying, going down to tear. And they said, hey, something's wrong with Smitty. And when I got back to him, I stood in front of his cell and I said, hey, I need to say something to you. I need to thank you because God used you to get to me. And I realized it was a terrible thing that happened to me, yet it was the best thing that happened to me. So there are times in life when things happen and you're wondering what will the road look like ahead after they happen. But there's a God involved in all of our lives. And that God that was involved in my life saw the road ahead from the time I was shot. 8 years later is when I entered San Quentin.
Now you're also chaplain now to the San Francisco 49ers, the Golden State Warriors. How does that San Quentin experience translate into that ministry? Is it different?
In some cases, yes, of course, because you're dealing with a lot of people that have means. Yet the similarities are the major states and the major counties that are feeder counties for prison systems across the country are also the major states and the counties that are feeder systems for professional sports. So you have guys that may be in prison that have probably played ball alongside of the men that are on the court or on the field. And so there are similarities, and so you find that guys, what was the difference is usually the thing that I say. What was a separating point that allowed one man to end up in this spot, another to end up in this spot? And in many cases, it was mentors. It was the people that poured into their lives.
Critical. It's critical. That's why your ministry is so important. I want to share a passage from Death Row Chaplain. You write, "Men whom society has cast aside due to their crimes must come to realize they are not their crimes, and then decide if it is worth it to move forward with their lives. In prison, hope has a conversation with reality, and hope polishes the rough spots of reality with faith, which says, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. Behold, old things are passed away, all things become new." Give me a sense of how society at large misunderstands prison and the imprisoned. What do we need to know?
Well, first of all, when we say that they're incarcerated, and I try to tell people everywhere I go that incarceration takes place before detention. You're incarcerated, and a byproduct of your incarceration may end up being detention. Prison is your place of detention. So when you find people that went to prison and they were detained and they got out, and there's this word called recidivism, nothing's changed. Well, for me, what I say is, if I can attack your incarceration while you're detained, whenever you're released, you will be released changed. And when you think about rehabilitation, what are you going to return back to? It means to change oneself back to one's former self. And I think the word should be regeneration. We're looking for regeneration. So for me, I've never seen a birth certificate that the name said rapist, murderer, thief, dope fiend. There was actually a name on it. So when guys come to me and they have all these street names, I said, what's your government name? What's the name on your birth certificate? Because that's the name I'm looking for. That's the way we're going to get started with this conversation.
No, it's recognizing the personhood and rediscovering that person buried under everything else. In the book, you also write, "I've relied upon a saying that has biblical significance. The law is for the lawless. A prison has to exist for certain people. Some are lawless to their core, and even if given an opportunity to change into law-abiding citizens, they would turn down the offer." Related to this, I want your take in the ongoing calls to defund the police, dismantle or rethink law enforcement agencies, particularly in what we're seeing across the country today. Your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things I would say is, whenever your mom is hurt or someone breaks into your mother's house, you want your mom to call the police. So there's a notion that we want to say get rid of the police. If something I know people that have called the police that we thought were really gangster type guys, and so there's a need for it. The thing that I would say is, there's also a need to understand the communities better. So many of the police departments in this country have employees that don't live in the communities where the police in the cities where they work. So they come to work, they leave. So when we're saying how do we address the police department? The thing I would say is more community policing, more people from the communities being on the force that would have a better understanding and relationship with the residents in the community.
Before I let you go, I want to talk about recidivism. We brought it up earlier. How do you teach your men, the men you mentor and minister to live on the outside? What skills did you try to impart to them so they could return to society and not return to prison?
Well, I like to use acronyms. So the first one that I really start working with the guys on is AIR, accountability, integrity, responsibility. And I got that from flying from Northern California to Southern California when the air in Northern California was clear as I was landing in LA at LAX. It was dirty, it was a smog alert. And I realized that a lot of people get used to breathing toxic, dirty air. And so for me, how can I get a guy that maybe has conditioned himself to survive on toxic air to understand clean air is really what you need? And so that comes with accountability, that comes with integrity, that comes with a sense of responsibility. And then we go to the CDCR, choices, decisions, consequences, responsibilities. Everything you do is associated with something else. And so as we sit around us and we start to teach these, and we wrote a lot of different curriculum that we teach in prisons, and as we teach it, we're basically trying to get guys to understand and model. And here's one of the things I'll say, Raymond. I ask a guy this: if we had welcome to the prison day for your children, and they would walk around with you all day on the condition that you didn't change anything you did, would you want your children to be there to see what you did that day? And if you can't say yes to that, then it's time to address what you're doing.
I wish we had more time. Earl Smith, thank you so much for being here. And you can keep up with Earl's work at chaplainearlsmithministries.com. Earl's memoir, Death Row Chaplain, Unbelievable True Stories from America's Most Notorious Prison, is available at bookstores everywhere. And a film adaptation is in the work, I hear. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Yes.
Earl Smith, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond. I appreciate it.